Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the People on the Go Lunch and Learn webinar. My name's Melissa, and I'll be moderating the webinar today. Before we start, let's check and make sure that you can see the screen and hear me. Great, thank you so much. I see that you're answering that in the questions panel. And just to let you know, that's the same questions panel that we'll be using for the Q&A at the end of our session today. Thank you so much. Just in case you are having technical difficulty, the support number to call is right there on the screen. That's 1-800-263-6317. Today's webinar is Creativity and Innovation, How to Experience the Lightning Bolt Every Day. And I have with me Daniel Guillory, our guest speaker, who I'll be introducing in just a moment. Just a quick background about why we have these sessions, especially for those who are with us for the first time. We have these sessions at People on the Go because our focus is productivity in the workplace. And the topics that you see on the screen are the topics that we cover. And we have them available in a variety of formats, including the webinar format, just like today's session. The webinars are offered on a monthly basis, and you can check them out on the website, and the URL is right there for you, people-onthego.com/webinars. We also have a membership program that makes these webinars very easy to take advantage of. And we have many resources available like the blog, Facebook, LinkedIn groups, and you can also follow us on Twitter. And now let's dive into today's topic. Let me introduce our guest speaker, Daniel Guillory. Daniel Guillory, CEO of Innovations International, is a recognized expert on creativity and innovation, leadership, and collaboration. Many different corporations and nonprofits, including Toyota Financial Services, Ronald McDonald House Foundation, Merck & Co., and Anheuser-Busch, have turned to Daniel for his guidance on how to strategically approach these areas and for assistance in implementing tactical solutions in learning and development. Prior to working with Innovations, Mr. Guillory was an attorney with Pillsbury Madison and Sutro LLP and remains a member of the California Bar. He received his JD from Harvard Law School and his BA in International Relations from Stanford. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Daniel, and this transition will just take one moment.
Wonderful. Okay. Thank you very much, Melissa. I'm about to put on my PowerPoint and make the transition. Let's see. Sorry about the delay.
No problem.
Let's see. Show. Okay. And now let me make sure. Can everybody see my screen? Can you see my screen, Melissa?
I sure can.
Wonderful. Thank you all for joining today. I appreciate it immensely, and I hope we'll have a little bit of fun today for the half an hour that we have together. Really, when I think of creativity, for me, it's something that we all want to do, that we all say we want to do, but that we probably don't do as often necessarily as we could if we spent just a little bit of time focusing on some key aspects of it. So today, really, my objective is to talk about some of the key dimensions of creativity, and also for you to leave with a set of tools that you can apply to the workplace immediately that it's good to know will not require any extra time necessarily. It's really just about how you focus and use that time. So prepare, and we'll have a little bit of fun today. Can you hear all right, Melissa? I just want to do a sound check from my end. Is everything all right from your end?
Yes, thank you. I can hear you just fine. Thank you for that.
Wonderful. Let's go into some definitions then to start. And what I'd like to talk about is a lot of people mix the terms creativity and innovation together. And so what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about how they're different. In particular, creativity, and for the definition we'll be using today, creativity is really the conception of a solution to an opportunity, problem, or challenge. So really we're talking about how we conceive of a new idea. Innovation, by contrast, is the process of actually bringing that idea or concept to market. So when you do a lot of research on creativity and innovation on the web, I find that a lot of the presentations are really on the second one. And today we'll really be focusing more so on the first one, since that's the one that I feel like is less explored and there's less out there on it, at least less that we do actively in the workplace. There are a number of steps in the creative process. And really the first step in that process really begins with identifying what your key question is. And we'll talk some more about that in just a moment. That is really the key input that we have in the creative process. In terms of how we work with that then, whatever that question is that we may have, that's really the incubation process. And that's where the tools will focus that we'll talk about. Where innovation comes in is really in terms of output. So what am I producing in the end that is something that's marketable or something I can actually do or apply in the workplace? So input, incubation, output. And of course, it's a dynamic process because whatever I get out on that back end then becomes what I use to help redefine and refashion my question as I continue to explore. So really, as I said before, the creative process begins with identifying what that question is. And I know it seems simple, but identifying the question is vital because the quality of that question and the specificity of that question is what relates directly then to my output on the back end. So when I use these tools that we're going to talk about today, I have to use these tools on something, on some kind of concept or question. Examples of some different types of questions that people can consider are, one, what would be an opportunity that you see that's not currently being addressed? So to me, things that I put in that category are something like the Post-it note. We didn't necessarily know that we needed the Post-it note before it was invented, but it certainly has become handy now that we have it. Another great example of something like that is an iPad. Now it seems like it's absolutely necessary and I can't live without it, but did I necessarily need that beforehand? So that's the first one, first kind of question that we can have is, what kind of opportunity do I see that's not currently being addressed? A second example is, what kind of problem would I actually want to solve? So is there a problem in the workplace? Is there a problem that my customer has if I'm producing some kind of a product that could benefit from some kind of creative solution that I haven't seen yet? The third one might be, what kind of obstacle would I like to overcome? That may be more interpersonal. So when we talk about creativity, it doesn't have to be necessarily just with things, but it can involve people, obviously. So are there obstacles in relationships or obstacles in other places where maybe if I thought about something in a different way or came up with a creative solution, the result might be different? And again, as I mentioned before, being as specific as possible is extremely important because the quality of that question will directly relate to the quality of the response. Very simple. Now, of course, if I want to be creative about something, one of the elements of that is being able to build the base of knowledge. If I don't know anything about something, what can I build? So the example that I give in terms of creative jumps is you take somebody like Picasso, obviously very creative, wonderful artist, created wonderful paintings, and I compare Picasso to my 7-year-old son who comes home and gives me a drawing from elementary school. Now, the quality of that jump may have been similar, or at least in their own minds, but of course, the base of knowledge is quite a bit different between my 7-year-old son and Picasso after years and years and years of studying art. And so the level or the extent to which I can make a creative jump is directly related to the base of knowledge. And what we'll talk about here are some ways to build that base of knowledge. A lot of these are taken from a book that I'll refer to at the end, which is called The Innovator's DNA. And what they did in this book is they actually explored different people who are considered major corporate innovators of our time. So people like Jeff Bezos of Amazon, people like Bill Gates of Microsoft, the late Steve Jobs of Apple, and looked at how they spent their time. And these were the different categories they came up with. So one was that they spent a lot of time networking, so talking with other people about what it is they were doing. And those might be people that were in their industry or people even outside of their industry. So asking questions and having discussions about what I'm doing on a constant basis with different people, because they'll give you a different perspective. What you're looking for a lot of times is that one nugget that you may not get from someone who's typically in your same industry or may work closely with you. A second one is observing. They spend a great deal of time observing and watching how certain things functioned. A third one is obviously being willing to experiment. So fortunately, it seems like in industry now it's become more acceptable to not necessarily have just a beta version and then a final, but to have a 1.0, a 2.0, a 3.0. That seems to be the way we work now and much more acceptable. So being willing to put something out there, give it a try, and see how I want to change it, and be in the constant process of changing something is another way to continue to build that base of knowledge. A fourth way is associating, and the best example that I have for associating, and when I say associating, I mean taking something from one area, one domain, and applying it to another domain. And a great example of that for me is, and I don't know if you remember this, I'm dating myself a little bit, but I hope some of you out there remember the Mac SE, the big box computer. That was what I used when I was in college. And one of the things that was so revolutionary about the Mac SE was that it was the first one to actually have fonts on it. All the different fonts that you could do versus a typewriter where you had to obviously change in and change out if you wanted to type with a different font. Well, the reason why that was an addition, and some of you may know this story already, why that was an addition to the Mac SE was that Steve Jobs, while he was in college, had just on a lark, on a whim, decided to take a calligraphy class, and so became interested in fonts. And so he decided to add that as a feature to the Mac SE, which is why it became one of the, it really kind of cornered the market initially on desktop publishing. And so that's an example of associating and how that can work. And the final one from this book that they mentioned is questioning. And that seems pretty self-evident, but never end asking questions. If something isn't working or if something is already working, how can it work better? What can I do differently? Is there something I can do differently? So constantly questioning. The other thing that I would say that's at a base, and that's not included in that book, but that I think is vital, obviously, and goes back to the Einstein example versus my son, is continuing education on the question itself. So if it's something that I'm studying or something that I'm working on that's related to computers, then whatever I need to do in terms of continuing to educate myself and stay current on trends in engineering, on trends in languages, on trends in tools and applications, all of that is going to continue to help me to be able to be more creative about whatever it is that I'm interested in. So we can build this base of knowledge, we can ask questions, we can talk to people, but one of the things that will be vital in terms of being creative is a willingness to overcome fears, because there must be some reason we're not as creative as we want to be. And that, I would contend, comes from fears that we have, whether they're conscious or unconscious fears. Some of them that we've found in the work that we've been doing that are associated with creativity are one, an altered reality. Things aren't going to be the same as they were, and I don't really know what it's going to look like. Some things, if they're revolutionary enough, might even work myself out of a job. And so an altered reality is something we have to contend with. Rejection is obviously a big one, coming up with something new. Who knows how people are going to respond to it. Failure, and obviously that's something that we have to accept. We've heard the story so many times of how many times, whether it's inventors or whether it's entrepreneurs of our day, tried something over and over again, and it wasn't until the fourth time, the fifth time, the sixth time, or the 10th time that they were actually successful. So is failure something that I'm willing to accept in being involved in the creative process? The unknown, and that goes into something of an altered reality. That's kind of the next step, I guess, past really an altered reality that I referred to. Professional inadequacy. How are people going to look at me if it does fail? So not only my own, I look at the failure category as my own willingness to accept it, but then there's another aspect to it, which is how am I looked at by other people if something doesn't work and being wrong. That's obviously got to be something that I'm ready to encounter and accept. So these are common fears, and so when I find myself pushing up against some of these and maybe resisting an opportunity to be creative, I need to ask myself and take some time to accept whether or not I'm ready to overcome this fear, whatever it might be out of these categories. And there may be others too, but these are the ones that we've seen most commonly in the work that we do. So now we're going to get into some of the actual tools. If I've built the base of knowledge and I've gotten over my fears of being creative, what are some of the things that I can do to be more creative on a day-to-day basis? One of the great tools that I like to use often is called mind mapping, and some of you may be familiar with this already. But what it involves is really taking an idea, and I call it a way of kind of structured brainstorming around a concept. And what you do is actually you take that idea and put it in the center of a sheet of paper. And then what you'll do is after identifying whatever that main idea or main question is, and again, we talked at the very beginning about it, identifying what your question is. After I've actually identified that, I create 4 to 6 spokes off of that, and those are the different main elements of that idea. They could be key things that I need to achieve something. They could be key barriers that I need to overcome to achieve that idea. But it's usually no less than 4 and no more than 6 spokes. So if you can envision it, and I'll try and jump out in a moment to show you an example of a mind map. If you can envision it, there would be a circle in the middle of the page with spokes coming off of it with these different main elements. Then off of these different main elements, I start to brainstorm off of the different spokes and continue to add different elements to it. Now what's beautiful about it is that it does 2 things. One is that it gives some kind of structure to my brainstorming, but it's also very visual in that I can see the whole, the gestalt of the idea at the same time as seeing different elements of it versus a linear outline where I'm looking from one item to another down a page. This is also a very powerful tool to use when I'm actually doing speeches or other things like that. In fact, I don't go up with a piece of paper in a speech anymore. Usually what I do now, if I'm presenting to a group of people, is I'll carry up a mind map. What I'll do, in fact, with the mind maps is I'll show you some examples of them at the very end because it's a little challenging to jump in and out of the presentation. So I'll show you some visual examples of those at the end of the presentation so you can see what that looks like. Finally, another powerful piece about a mind map is that it allows you to give the narrative of your concept or idea to somebody else. So sharing that mind map with a partner is very powerful. And if you're open to it, letting them add spokes to that mind map because they'll have ideas and other extensions off of it that you might not visualize yourself. If you're using a group process, or you're in a group, for example, on a team where people come from multiple perspectives on a certain concept or idea, it's very powerful to have that whole group do mind mapping for team brainstorming and then actually put up their mind map about that idea. So imagine you're having an obstacle, in your team is having a challenge with some particular issue. To take a few minutes and have everybody do a mind map on how they view that problem and what the potential solutions are, first individually, then to actually put those mind maps up on a wall together where everybody can see them and have everybody give their narrative of their mind map and then let people from the team add spokes onto other people's mind maps is a very powerful process and a great way to get a whole 360-degree view of a problem. I was talking to somebody, one of my friends who works in who owns a tech startup, and he talked about the fact that with brainstorming sometimes it was challenging because you had some people who tended to speak more than others and others who were quiet and didn't say much, and so their ideas didn't get expressed. What's nice about involving and including this as part of the process is that then that person who might be quiet is required to actually share their part of the story, and everybody will hear their part of the story in addition to somebody who might be more comfortable doing it on a regular basis. So you won't, this is a nice tool to not miss out on the contributions and perspectives of other people versus just having a brainstorming session where if I raise my hand, I talk, and if I don't, then my ideas are not necessarily heard. Another technique that's wonderful is programming your own creative process. And so the first question to ask when you talk about programming your own natural creative processes are determining when you're creative. Now, Melissa, I think we've got a poll to ask you, a poll question to ask you, and that is if you have a sense as to when you are most creative. And I've given you 5 options on that poll question. I'd like you to respond to those when you get a chance. And I know if your number 1 option isn't up there, I apologize, but pick the one that's closest at least for you. We've given you 5, so hopefully one will work. But I wanted to get a feel for the audience and see what of the different categories in terms of when I'm most creative were most common among those of you that are listening right now. Is that poll question up, Melissa?
It is, and folks are voting right now, and I see that.
Wonderful. Yeah. Wonderful. Just pop in when you're ready. We'll give it a couple minutes. We'll give it a few more seconds, and then we'll find out how everybody responds.
Sounds
great. What we're going to do is we're going to take with this question, the question that I identified as whatever my main question is that I'm trying to address. What we'll do now is we'll talk about the process of actually programming that creative process. So for me, an example of a process for me is when I swim. A lot of times ideas will be running around in my head about something, but I swim on a regular basis. So when I go in and swim, when I come back out, somehow I come out with clarity on whatever that issue is. Another time for me where I tend to be very creative is in the morning when I first get up. I tend to get up earlier than the other members of my family, and it's quiet. My mind has had time to ruminate on whatever I'm thinking about, and I'm able to get down and get to work very easily and very quickly and achieve a lot in a short amount of time. So for me, those are very powerful times. Can you tell me how everybody answered, Melissa?
Yeah, I sure can. So 17% said that they were most creative in the morning, 9% said when they were going to sleep at night, 23% when showering, 9% again when exercising, and 42% in conversation with others.
Wow, okay. Fascinating. Okay, this is great information. This is great information. So you can see we process things in very different ways and at very different times. And I forced you into picking the one where you were most creative. Obviously, there may be others too that comes a close second. So this was just a quick diagnostic to give us a sense as to what's most common for people. So figuring out when I'm most creative, which is what you've just done. The next part of it is it associated with a trigger event? So is there something in particular that sets it off? And the idea with any of these processes is, again, to take control of them, because obviously these are processes that are going on anyway, and right now my mind is subconsciously prioritizing for me rather than me actually prioritizing myself. So figuring out what that trigger event might be. The third one is, how do I initiate the process? So what I can do on a conscious basis is actually start to take whatever my question is that I've identified. What's great is to keep that on a card with you, on a 3x5 card, and remind yourself of that on a regular basis, and actually say to myself when I swim or before I shower or the day or before I go to sleep, to say I'd like a response to this question, so that I'm actually then programming the process to come out with an actual solution to that question. What process do I use? And then practicing it consciously. So that's what we just talked about. So with any of these, again, with any of these processes we're going to talk about, whether it's mind mapping or whether it's programming my own creative process, identifying what that question is and plugging it into this process is what I start to do on an active basis. And again, because these are things you're already doing and naturally doing, it doesn't require any additional time, as we said. Another great technique is actually using the sleep state, which of course doesn't require any extra time because we all sleep. One thing that I always ask people is how often people remember their dreams. I know that some people say they never remember their dreams. A number of people say that they do commonly. Whether we remember them or not, we actually dream on average about 4 to 5 times per night. So we're doing it. It's just a question of, again, if we're choosing to control it. A great example I have of the sleep state and using it not in a conscious way was when I was in high school. I'm sure you all have examples like this. I remember working on this calculus problem all night. I was up until midnight and could not get it. Just kept working and working and working, could not figure it out. I went to sleep, woke up the next morning, went to my desk, and immediately knew how to do it. Now, obviously, I didn't become more brilliant overnight. I had the same amount of knowledge as I did when I went to sleep. But because I was in a mode where basically I was kind of on a burning platform, I had to get this problem set in the next day, my mind, both consciously and subconsciously, prioritized finding an answer to that problem over anything else that I was going to think about. And so most of the time, though, unless we're in a back-to-the-wall situation like that, our subconscious tends to self-select what will be the priority for me on a given night. What we're going to walk through here real briefly are some ways that you can actually select what you would like to work on overnight in your dream. So the first one is to make a dream request, and this is your question that we talked about, coming up with that question and being real specific about that. And then the second is to remember and record your dream. So in terms of remembering your dream, if you don't remember on a regular basis your dreams, what you can do is before you go to sleep, ask yourself 10 times that you want to remember, you want an answer to whatever your question is, and you'd like to wake up after you've had a dream about that particular question. You'd like to wake up when you have your answer. And I guarantee you, if you do that, and it may not happen the first night, it may not happen the second night, but I can guarantee you that if you make that request to actually wake up and remember your dream every day for a week, you will start to be able to do that. I've done a number of these sessions over the past few years, and I've made an offer to anybody that if they do it for a week and they can't remember their dream, I'll happily give them $100, and nobody's come back to me yet. So again, but you have to do it exactly as I said. You have to make that request to wake up when your dream is complete. And what's best is to have a piece of paper next to your bed and a pen, so that what you can do is then quickly write down what the key symbols were. You don't necessarily have to write down the whole dream word for word, but if you write down what the key 10 or 15 symbols are, that'll probably be enough for you to jog your memory about what the whole dream was. So identifying what those key symbols are. Then interpreting the dream. So what you'll have is, again, these different key symbols, and they'll mean something to you personally. And so putting down what that means to you in the context of your question will start to paint a picture of what it is what the answer is that you're starting to come up with. Now, with these problems that I'm trying to address, one thing to remember is that the size and depth of the problem will correspond also to the amount of dream work I have to do on something. So if it's a large problem, if I'm asking myself, how can I solve world hunger, that's not something that I'm going to resolve probably in one dream. For me, obviously, my calculus problem was very, very micro, and so solving that problem was something my mind was able to do in one night. But depending upon the complexity of the problem, it may require several dream requests over several days or even weeks, and not just necessarily one. So remember that corresponds one-to-one. The size and grandeur of the request will correspond to the number of dreams that it takes to really come to some kind of a solution. Finally, sharing the interpretation with others is a really powerful thing to do. So because what you can do is share your interpretation and get feedback from them, first of all, on your interpretation, and secondly, a really powerful tool is to go through a Gestalt process where they say what that dream would mean to them, not imposing their interpretation of it on you, but what it would mean to them if it were their dream, and listening to that, because it may jog some different things in your mind that you hadn't necessarily considered. Finally, continue this process until you feel really complete about that particular one, and then begin the process again. Again, great process, very powerful tool used by a number of inventors to come up with various things, from the steam engine to just all sorts of things that I talk about in the longer version of the course that we do. Finally, the last technique that I'd like to talk about is creative visualization, and that's really right in between the work that I do consciously as well as the work that I would do unconsciously when I'm asleep. So creative visualization is really a state of semi-consciousness. So first of all, a somewhat meditative state where I find a quiet, comfortable environment. I have a certain passive attitude, and I let go of whatever my current constructs are. So really starting to relax myself and release from whatever barriers I might usually have in a given day. Make sure that I'm physically comfortable, of course. And then what I do is I take that question and put it through the 4 theoretical quadrants of the brain. These obviously aren't physical quadrants, but more constructs as to how the mind works, different parts of how the mind works. One part is, first of all, the creative solution. So where do I let my mind explore and run wild to figure out what the solution might be to that problem, and focusing on that in a meditative state. Then moving to the interpersonal response. How does it involve people? What do I need to leverage in terms of people? What kinds of relationships are going to be involved in this? Because I assume this is probably a workplace problem, and it's not something where simply coming up with a solution in a vacuum is enough, and I can just implement it. Usually it's going to involve somebody else. Finally is the logical analysis. So what's the plus and minus? How much are things going to cost? And actually starting to think through that part of the process. And then finally, implementation. How do I actually bring this to market in the end? And doing this in a semi-conscious state. And there's some resources that I'll talk about at the end of this that you can use to really take yourself through this process in a more exhaustive way. So some of the different materials that I've talked about that are really powerful in terms of these different processes that we talked about. One is called the Dream Workbook. and that's a book by Jill Morris. There are a number of workbooks on dream state work and dream state analysis. That is one of my favorites. Another one is called The Innovator's DNA, which I referred to earlier about building the base of knowledge and those 5 key characteristics. Creative Visualization is by Shakti Gawain and can walk through that visualization process that I mentioned. Ingenious is a book that is more about kind of common corporate examples and things that people do physically to office space and other things to create more creative environments. And then Talent Code and The Little Book of Talent are 2 books by Daniel Guillory, an author or writer from the New York Times. And it's really about the intersection of creativity and excellence. And those are 2 great books that I enjoy for any of you who are passionate about excellence in areas of music or athletics or anything else. Those 2 books really cross that intersection of creativity and are really located at that intersection of creativity and excellence. With that, I think I'll stop now. My 30 minutes are up, and hand it back to Melissa.
Thanks so much, Daniel. I'm going to transition back over to me. This will just take a moment again. I'd just like to say thank you, Daniel, so much for sharing your presentation and your insights with us today. Here is Daniel's contact information if you'd like to get in touch with him and learn more about the topics that he was talking about today. And now, before we take your questions, I have a few reminders. For those of you who joined us later in the session, please feel free to visit our blog and join our Facebook and LinkedIn groups to stay updated on future events like this one today. Here are a few of our upcoming webinars that you might like to consider, and you can access those on our website, and the URL is right there for you, people-onthego.com/webinars. And now we're at the Q&A portion of our presentation. So at this time, if you have any questions for Daniel, feel free to enter those in the questions panel on your screen, and I will relay those to Daniel. Here's a question. I actually try not to think about work for a time before going to bed because otherwise my sleep is less restful. Any ideas on how to use the brain during sleep in a restful way if this is a challenge at nighttime?
Sure. So what will happen is it doesn't really impact the quality of sleep, I find, because, again, it's something where my brain is working on things either way. If it's something that, and again, when we're talking about creativity, ideally, we're using it as something in a way where we want to do something about it. So if the things at work aren't something that I want to necessarily address with a creative solution, then I wouldn't use that one. I might focus on some of the other techniques like creative visualization, like using my own natural creative times instead. The mind is going to be dreaming anyway. And so what I can do is, if those aren't things that I want to think about or things that I want to focus on, I might use, if I want creative solutions in other areas, I might choose those instead as a way to find creative solutions. But focus on those types of challenges or opportunities during sleep state instead.
Great. Here's another question about the sleep state. How much sleep delivers the most amount of dreams? That's a good question. For those of us trying to get by on as little sleep as possible.
They're actually not necessarily time related. So it can be a short amount of time or a long amount of time. It's not a one-to-one correspondence as if I have 8 hours of sleep and so I have 4 dreams in that amount of time because they're 2 hours per dream or something like that. There's not a specific roadmap, but generally speaking, if people sleep the general kind of 6, 7, 8 hours a night, they will generally dream about 4 to 5 times, whether we choose to remember them or not.
Great. We had another request. If you could please mention the authors of the books that you presented on again, Daniel, that would be great. And if you could list some of those off.
Sure. So for the Dream Workbook, that author is Jill Morris. For Creative Visualization, that author is Shakti Gawain, Gawain. For the two Talent Code, the Talent Code and the Little Book of Talent, that author is Daniel Coyle, Coyle. For Ingenious, I'm forgetting the author right now, and I'll have to send that to Melissa as a follow-up. And then for the Innovator's DNA, that author, it's co-authored. I remember one of the author's names. His name is Clayton Christensen. So those are the ones that I remember. And Melissa, I'll be sure to send you the name of the author of Ingenious also.
Great. And everyone attending today, just to let you know, we post recordings of the webinar on our Facebook and LinkedIn page. Our group is Accomplishing More with Less, and so you'll have access to those there. So you'll get that information shortly in the next couple days.
Melissa, one thing I thought of real quickly, Melissa, is there any way you can hand the screen back to me so I can show people a mind map? I forgot to show people that.
That's a great idea. Yes, I can do that. So just one moment here.
Okay. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So this is an example of a mind map. This one's on time management. And you can see that they took time management and they had their main spokes off of it, and then did a number of different spokes. You can have a lot of fun with it, with creating images of different things. Again, it's a visual way to tell a story, and it helps me in terms of being able to see the whole gestalt, but also helps in terms of being able to relay that full story to somebody else instead of just delivering it in pieces. So that's an example of one of them right there. There are a number of these. If you type in mind map on the web and go into the images section, you'll see a number of them, and there are lots of sites on mind mapping. It's a great additional tool to use, and one that's easy to integrate into any meeting.
That's great. Thank you. Daniel, I have a question for you. How do you encourage some of these practices in the workplace, and how do you encourage a culture of creativity? Whether it's using some of these tactics, maybe not sleeping and dreaming, but how would you bring these into a work environment, maybe at any level, if you're a manager or more of a mid-level worker?
Right. So, so the first thing, in terms of influencing the culture around creativity, there are a set of behaviors around how I am in terms of responding to ideas as a manager. So when somebody comes up with a new idea, do I take the time to explore it? Or do I reject it immediately, or do I deconstruct it immediately? So as a manager, am I encouraging that? Am I acknowledging? So one is being able to encourage new ideas and not necessarily reject things out of hand when new concepts come to me. A second piece around that is when there are creative solutions that we come up with or that a group comes up with, are those somehow honored or acknowledged? That doesn't necessarily have to be monetary, because I know that that can be challenging sometimes and has different implications, but there are other ways that we can recognize people for creative contributions. A third piece around that is really around 8 different tools that we have in terms of HR, so how we select people. Do teams I select have people that come from different points of view, or do I tend to select people who agree with me only? Because obviously if I want to be more creative, I don't necessarily need 5 of me. I need other people with different ideas and different perspectives on something. Another way I can look at that is how we recruit people. So again, just like when I'm choosing people for a team to work on temporarily, in terms of hiring, I know we say we want somebody who fits within the culture, but there's got to be a balance between fitting within the culture and cloning ourselves all the time necessarily. And what's the distinction between that leaves that creative tension, but yet somebody who will function effectively in our environment? Those are some key tools that come to mind, and there are a number of other elements that we can look at in terms of the type of training that I do, in terms of the way that I promote it amongst people in our meetings. So do I use mind mapping, for example, in meetings when I want to, as a nice tool in terms of encouraging people to contribute, things like that. So those are some things that come to mind at least.
That's great. Thank you so much for that. Well, we've reached the end of our time today at 12:40. Daniel, is there anything else that you'd like to bring up just as we wrap up here?
No, I'd like to thank you all and encourage you to send any questions or even examples that you have. I'd love to share other examples that other people have had of anything that I've talked about or other ideas around creativity. So if there's anything that you want to share, please feel free to email me. And again, as Melissa said earlier, this is a very short version. We have longer versions of this course that we can deliver for you internally or on a virtual basis if it's something you're interested in. So thanks a lot. It's a topic that I'm very passionate about, and thanks for joining us today.
Yes, thank you so much, Daniel. We really appreciate your insights, and thank you so much, everyone, for your questions. When you exit the webinar today, a feedback form will pop up, and if you have a moment and you can answer some of those questions, that would be really great. Thank you all again for being here, and have a wonderful rest of your day.